Pray to Sarada Devi first. Om Yathagnir Dahika Shakti Rama Krishne Sthita Hiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Saradam Pranamamyaham. Om Shanti 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 Vagdevatam Ashraye. Om, I take refuge in that goddess of speech and learning, Sarada Devi, who is inseparable from the fire of Sri Ramakrishna, as heat is inseparable from regular fire. I pray to that goddess who is herself the embodiment of all knowledge and the embodiment of all gods and goddesses. Om, peace, peace, peace. So that's actually a very fitting prayer, that mantra for today's class, because today we're going to discuss dhyāna-ślokas, meditation mantras for the goddess Saraswati. And you might have known that the name Sarada also means Saraswati. So Sarada is an interchangeable name with Saraswati, or also Vak Devi or Vag Devi or Vag Devata. So the goddess of speech, the goddess of learning, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of music, the goddess of civilization, and importantly, according to the Trika, the best representation for the absolute nature of reality, which is pure non-dual consciousness. So that Parā Devī or Vani, another name for her is Vani, just simply the word Vani, or rather the sound even, the vibration. Vani, Vak Devi, Parā, Saraswati, Sarada. These are all names for this goddess who we're going to be speaking about tonight. And this is the last thing we need to do, actually. I'm pretty confident in saying this is the last thing we need to do to close up our nyāsa section, which I've not been able to close up for a long time. Because every time I want to turn the page and move on to the next chapter of our puja studies, I remember something about the nyāsa. And I think that speaks to the depth and sophistication of the nyāsa. So if you're studying puja, if you're studying tantra at this level, the first thing you realize is that it's a very sophisticated and refined tradition. There is very refined language being used. So in terms of poetics, as a litany, it's very exalted. So the poetry is very refined. The Sanskrit that we're using is, of course, high Sanskrit. And not just that, the poetry is one thing, the litany is one thing, the liturgy is something else. The worship itself is multivalent. Each symbol means so many different things. And so to keep track of all of those various meanings, that's important. But also to intuitively enter into that, the power of that symbol, which means all those various things, is quite another thing. So the puja, as you probably have noticed by now, is a very refined sort of practice. It deploys all of our language faculties, our poetic faculties, our artistic faculties, our faculties of memorization, our faculties of singing and chanting. So much of the puja requires chanting, and in many places we sing these mantras. And of course, the puja itself is very artistic because the way we arrange things, the yantras that we draw, in many cases, the sculpting that we need to do to create the images for worship, and the use of flowers and sandalwood paste, there's a certain agility, or rather I would say dexterity required in puja. Mental agility to understand these concepts and keep track of them as you're moving through the puja, but physical dexterity to be able to manage all the various tools and implements of the puja and to offer the flowers at the right time and whatnot. So, needless to say, it requires a lot of culture. In fact, in the Malay language, the word for culture, budhaya, is of course Sanskrit based, and it's the same word for intellect or imagination or intuition or the higher mind, discernment. So culture is really like using the mind in the highest, most refined possible way. So everything we do as a civilization is for the purposes of culture. So music, art, poetry, literature, architecture, arguably every single thing that we engage in as a human species is on some level a refinement of one's culture. Really what learning is just becoming more and more cultured according to, of course, the dominant paradigm of that particular culture in which you live. So for instance, grammar is a very controversial study because grammar is just forcing people in school to adopt the dominant grammar of like the elite of society at that time. So there are other grammars, there are other ways to use language in a community, but often grammar, right grammar, proper speech is just whatever grammar is dominant in the elite of society at that time. So of course, this can be controversial too as to what culture means and who gets to decide. So the monopolies of culture is also something that ought to be debated and challenged. So here in Tantrik culture, we're of course including a lot of elements that high Brahmanism rejected as uncultured. That's the interesting thing. So what we might call tribal or shamanic elements, but even those words might not be very politically correct. But elements that are more, I prefer the word autochthonous, more traditional in the sense that they, again, how do we say this? They relate to people that live outside the urban mainstream, if you will. So people who are worshipping Kali in the jungles or in cremation grounds, who have a different social structure than that of the Vedic Brahmins and Kshatriyas and Shudras and Vaishyas and whatnot. So the cultures of these people, outcast by the view of many Brahmins, and their impure practices, which are scorned and condescended to by high Brahmanism, all of those are included in Tantric culture, but without, and this is interesting, removing or diminishing all that urban literature, liturgical, poetical language, math kind of stuff. So like all the fruits of urban civilization, that's integrated, as well as all the insights of more autochthonous traditions, those are also really included as well. So what we get is an incredibly complex culture that has the most, I don't want to say refined elements of urban culture, but I'll use that phrase for now, as well as the most refined elements of non-urban, non-Vedic culture as well. So what we're dealing with is a remarkable piece of sophistication. And so we need the support of Parā Devī, of Sarasvatī, who is herself the goddess of speech and learning. See, so much of puja, by the way, is a speech act. So much of what we're doing is saying a mantra at the right time, accompanied by the right gesture. So the power of speech is, of course, stressed above all in the mantra shastra or the tantra shastra, the science of doing ritual worship. So the goddess Sarasvatī, or Sarada, is not only the goddess of culture, learning, poetry, aesthetics, music. She's also importantly the goddess of speech, so she rules over the primordial vibrations of sound, which in previous lectures we described as the basic building blocks of all reality. So there's a very complex linguistic mysticism to understand here. We've been going over it in the course of a few lectures recently. So how represents the primordial upsurge of creation, prakasha, and then is the ability of that prakasha, Shiva, to rest in his own innate fullness. So Shakti is that Ananda Shakti, or that Vishranti, that ability for Lord Shiva to savor his own infinitude. That's and then E is will, Icha, and E is Ishana. So like that, we're taking each letter in the Sanskrit syllabary and we're associating it to a particular word that describes a particular metaphysical function, that describes the logical sequence of the emergence, meaning the emission of reality, as well as, importantly, the reabsorption of reality, which is very important for the practitioner, for the meditator. To be able to project the world is one thing, to be able to withdraw it and enter into deep meditation is another. So the manipulation of the Sanskrit language is to reflect that emission and reabsorption. So given that these letters, I, U, Ra, La, A, I, all these letters, Ka, Ga, given that these don't necessarily just represent sounds, but in fact represent the primordial spirit. Is the word philosophical? Is the word spiritual? Is the word metaphysical? Is the word ontic? There's no word here. This is the primordial semiotic, not semantic, but semiotic, by which the entire universe appears and disappears. So it's quite important that Saraswati is not just understood to be the goddess of learning, like a kind of Athena, if you will. She's importantly also the supreme reality, because she represents all speech, all sound, all vibration. And this reality is really nothing but that vibration on every level. So therefore, Saraswati, importantly in the Tantric tradition, especially for the Trika, a Kaula sect in the Shakta-oriented Tantric tradition, for the Trika, there's a new channel, the meme channel. And now that it's here, I have to mute it. Okay, because obviously that's going to be the most popular channel moving forward. Saraswati is also the goddess of memes. So I'm going to ask Saraswati for help here to keep the meme channel quiet for a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, and like as a unit of information, a meme as a unit of information, like each of these letters is a unit of vibration, primordial transmission. And so the universe is founded upon these vibrations, and she's the goddess who rules over all of those vibrations. So technically the nyāsa, that section in our puja that we've been studying together for the past few weeks, is itself a veneration of this goddess, Goddess Saraswati. So many of the mantras that are associated to nyāsa, like for instance the mantra we chant in the beginning of the Shrishti nyāsa, in the beginning of the Sthiti nyāsa, at the beginning of the Sanghara nyāsa, these are all of course just dhyana mantras for Saraswati. We haven't translated them together yet and we haven't gone over them, but I think we should do that now in order that we may close the nyāsa chapter. So the last thing we should do, and in fact I think we'll double back in our next go around and we'll go deeper into nyāsa. There's just so much to say about it. For now, it essentially means consecration, touching the body in certain places in a particular sequence while uttering the phonemes which represent the basic building blocks of all reality. So to understand nyāsa, we of course have to have some command of the Sanskrit syllabary. We don't need to know Sanskrit grammar, Vyakarana. We don't need to know Sanskrit poetics, known as kavya. And we certainly don't even need to have any kind of Sanskrit vocabulary whatsoever. In fact, these days, all of that stuff is becoming less and less relevant because we have the help of our assistants, ChatGPT, and in many ways, she is Ma manifest to help us in all of these ways. You can ask her, Goddess Saraswati as ChatGPT. After all, ChatGPT and other large language models are an expression of Goddess Saraswati. They're a storehouse of information and learning. And then you ask them, what does this Sanskrit mantra mean? Is it samasa? Is this a compound? Or is it just a combination of words? Like, what's the rule here? What's the root word? You can ask ChatGPT all of these things. Or yes, and as Vera is saying, hi Vera, good to see you by the way. I haven't gotten a chance to say hi to anybody yet because I have quite a bit of material to get through. So we'll get through the material first and then maybe hang out in a little bit. But yeah, so there are all these various large language models. They can help you with your Sanskrit. So it's not so much that you need to know Sanskrit or know the grammar or know the vocabulary, but you at the very least, for puja, need to know the ABCD. You know, like that, you have to be able to chant e, u. It's the ABCD melody. You should be able to chant it front and back. You have to be able to go from to ksha, and then from ksha back to You'll have to have at least that level of fluency in order to be able to do nyāsa in a meaningful way. So that's required, a basic understanding of Sanskrit syllabary, and then some dexterity and some coordination is required too. So I think it's called proprioception, but those of you who practice Hatha Yoga with Kuleshwari, for instance, a few moments ago, Hatha Yoga is very good because it allows you to practice using your arms and legs and situate everything in space. But even just any kind of regular exercise, like running on a treadmill or going to the gym or just like going on a hike or something, anything that you do with your body improves this proprioception. So many people who, come to spirituality, sometimes they have an intellectual orientation, so they neglect basic embodiment practices. Dance, things like this can be very important because it's required in nyāsa that you have this sense of the body, sense of embodiment, and also the necessary grace that comes with that. As we practice with the body, we're able to move the body more skillfully. Like that. So the fluidity and the grace that comes through dance and hatha yoga and all these other embodiment practices, again, that's a requirement. So you'll need to have culture on the level of the mind. You'll need to have culture on the level of the body also. And culture on the level of the intellect to intuit into the deeper meaning of what's going on here. So notice, the practice of nyāsa, what to say of the practice of puja is no joke. Even Sri Ramakrishna once said, in one place, he said, Kali Puja is no joke. He said, Shakti Puja is no joke. Those were his exact words. It's no joke. It's difficult. It takes a lot and it requires a lot of excellence on the level of the pujari. So like I was saying earlier this morning when I was prefacing this class, like when we start studying puja, arguably when we start studying any of this material to begin with, it's overwhelming. We're like, oh my God, there's so much. And Swami Bhajanananda Saraswati at the Kali Mandir, he made a funny joke one time. He said, it's not like there's 9,000 years of stuff to catch up on or anything. There's 9,000 years of material, at least. By conservative estimates, this is how old this civilization is. And the important thing about this particular transmission is that the civilization, for historical reasons, flourished for such a long time that there's just so much material available. Like the scientists talk about atoms. And then the Nyāyakas and the Vaisheshikas are like, oh, you guys finally caught on to the idea of the basic unit of matter. Cute. You see, like you hear these echoes in modern quantum mechanics, like of the stuff that people were discussing at the height of this civilization before its decline during the Mughal and the British periods. And of course, all civilizations have rises and falls. But the thing about the Indian civilization, what's special about it, is we have this extant tradition of litany and liturgy and philosophy and poetry like that. So all the material is available, and that's the problem. Because so much of it is available, one can easily become overwhelmed, especially when attempting to practice at this level, doing puja at this level and studying philosophy at this level. The study becomes very Sanskritic, very text-based, and it calls upon the fullest use of the faculties of the human mind and body and prana. So that being said, getting the blessing of Goddess Saraswati is very important. So I think I'll just put it that way. To deal with how overwhelming things can be, to deal with the amount of learning and the amount of memorization that is required of us. Yeah, it's overwhelming, right? And I think we all feel that way. And every level, the more we learn, the more we realize there is to learn. The more we know, the more we understand that we don't know. And then there's this appetite to know, which in some traditions can be considered a trap. But in our tradition, which is life-affirming on every level, we think learning is, on the whole, good for you. You know, there are many spiritual traditions that get burned, and they're like, learning is bad, burn all your books, stare at a wall. That's good too. There's a time and place for that, but not our tradition. Our tradition is very body positive, learning positive, life positive. And so you have a mind, we should use it. We have a body, we should use it. We have speech, we should use it. But we should use all of these things in order to attain that which is most worth attaining, the highest bliss, which we just call God, but it could be reality or whatever else name you want to give it. So importantly, there's a lot of learning to do, and we get that feeling, and often our desire to learn can be demonized by some communities. We can be made to feel bad for wanting to study or learn. None of that here. Learning is a positive and wonderful thing. Yes, it can increase pride, but so too does one become prideful when they decide that they don't need any learning. That's worse, I think. I prefer a proud learned person to a proud unlearned person. The latter is just bimbodant. That's a word that my debate coach used to use, actually. Bimbodance. It's when a person sounds like they know what they're talking about. It's confidence. But actually, this person doesn't know anything. He's just talking out of his ass or something. Those are the most dangerous kinds of people in the world. They act like they know what they're talking about, but they have no sources, no citation, no textual basis, no lineage. And then this is how we are, a lot of us, tricked in the spiritual world. There is some charismatic teacher. They speak well, and they sound like they are convinced. They maybe have managed to convince themselves, and therefore they're quite convincing to others. But when you look carefully, when you peer under the hood, you see there's no substance there, actually. No text, no lineage, no tradition, no checks and balances. Read also no accountability. So that's the danger of the spiritual world. That's why at least I have a bit more respect for the Abrahamic traditions, in a sense. Because the Buddhistic and Dharmic traditions, there's a lot of emphasis on the Guru, and sometimes when they come to the West, there's not a lot of demand for accountability. But at least in the Abrahamic traditions, there's the Bible, Never mind that it's been translated in a numerous ways. And, at the end of the day, the sermon fella, the pastor, will still have to point you to particular verses in the Bible. And a good pastor will show you different ways to interpret that particular word. He or she or they will say, usually he will say, well, in this King James, it's translated this way. Or in that version, it's translated this way. And maybe if they're really good, they'll say the original Aramaic has this connotation, or the original Greek has this connotation, or something like that. But they're very text-based. Arguably, there's only one text, unless you're a Catholic and you have access to Aquinas and Anselm and whatnot. But it's a text. It's better than nothing, You still have to use the word of Christ in some way, God's eternal word. So that's important, because, at least then, there's at least some accountability. Of course, you can twist the word however you want, and you can try to get it to say things that it doesn't say, because after all, chances are the people themselves aren't reading the book. But usually they have it out. That's what I noticed. I've listened to some Christian sermons, and I was very impressed, because in these talks, sometimes people have their Bibles out. And the pastor will say, now, and he'll say like this, now, the word of the Christ is as follows. You will be fine in a time of grief. And now I want you to list all your assets. And this is actually something I heard. I was listening yesterday. And I want you to list all your liabilities. And then I want you to circle this word in this verse. Rejoice in your grief. Now I want you to write joy over all your liabilities. Because that's the word of the Christ. Joy. Only a Christian can feel joy in suffering. So that's the vibe, right? Now it's good. It's inspiring. It's full of Shakti. After all, they're standing there as a representative of the Christ, who is full of that divine fervor. So it's good. And they're using the text, which is even better. So they have to point to the verse. And they have to cross-reference, like this verse in Corinthians. It's also here in Romans. And these first 4 verses in James, like that. And so usually the conversations that you have in a Christian space or an Islamic space will be about verses in the Quran or verses in the Bible. And that's very important, actually. So in any case, books are important, and lineages are important, and study is important. It's when we don't do these things that the pastor can get away with saying whatever they want to say, or Shankara or Ramanuja or someone like that can get away with saying what they want to say because we ourselves don't do our study. So we need Saraswati's help. I think that's the main point here. Like, we need to invoke Saraswati and gain her blessing that our mind remains clear and that we have a strong memory and that we're able to like handle these ideas in a systematic and sensible way. Like, all of that is the grace of the goddess Saraswati. So I was going to, just rattle off a few strategies for approaching puja and approaching Sanskrit based tantric studies in general. But then I just before coming onto the lecture and translating some of these verses, I was like, no, honestly, all of that is secondary. The most important thing is that we have Saraswati's help. So praying to Saraswati with the mantras that we're going to describe today can be very helpful. And then just trust that she is there, clearing the mind, sanctifying one's speech, so that when we speak, we can articulate clearly. And when we can listen clearly. And then we can retain and hold all these ideas in the mind like that. And use them, ultimately, to apply them. And there's that beautiful verse, Sahanao bhavatu, sahanao bhunaktu, tejas viryam karvavahai. This is Shanti mantra. It says, protect the teacher and the student. May we not find fault with one another. May we learn and may we apply. May our learning shine forth in our life like that. So these are all important mantras, and Saraswati, as the goddess of speech, of learning, of culture, of music, of aesthetics, importantly in the Tantric tradition, is exalted to the status of the supreme goddess, Parā. This is the Trika's tradition's ultimate view of reality, Parā. So these are mantras that will be immediately reminiscent of Parā Devī, as you've encountered her in the writings and the practices of the Trika. So let's look at them. Now, let me just show you where they are. So this is and by the way, this is the last thing that we need to say for the nyāsa section for this season. And then we're going to move to a new section today. And it's fitting that we should do so today because it's the Spring Equinox. So I'm so excited. It's the first day of a new season. So there's this feeling of freshness and newness. There are new sounds. The birds are making new sounds. And there's there is in the air a sort of vitality that we're celebrating with things like Holi and Shivaratri. So Sarasvatī Pūjā, importantly, Vasant Panchami it's called, it's the first day of spring. So Sarasvatī Pūjā is also associated to the spring. The first, in India, and by the Vedic calendar, the first day of spring is Vasant Panchami, which is Sarasvatī Pūjā, by the way. So I think on this Spring Equinox, I think there could be no better time than to talk about Saraswati. So let's talk about Saraswati. Now, during the puja itself, I don't do a very elaborate worship to Saraswati. Though we are in the tradition of the Trika, you could say she's our ultimate reality. She's pure non-dual conscious. Why don't we do a more elaborate puja to Saraswati? Well, because I'm doing a puja to Kali, and Kali includes all forms of Devi. And Kali is the form that I choose to conceive ultimate reality in. But it's also important to note that the whole nyāsa section itself is an elaborate worship of Saraswati. So yeah, Matangi also, Neela Saraswati. That's another understanding. The Tantrik version of Saraswati could be Parā, or it could just be Neela Saraswati, otherwise known as Matangi, who is actually over here, and you can see she got splashed with a lot of holy dust. And this will make sense because here's Sarada Devi and here is Saraswati, but above her is a picture of Neela Saraswati. So this whole altar here is a Vak Devi altar. Bye, you guys. The whole altar is a Saraswati altar, but everybody who is on the altar, so she's got a green parrot over there, but the veena is a constant symbol. Saraswati is usually holding a veena, except in the dhyana mantras that I'm going to introduce in just a few moments. There aren't any references to veenas, interestingly. She's holding usually a rosary. That's an important thing because the rosary mantra, of course, that represents the power of phoneme expressed as mantra. Varna, mantra, pada, kala, tattva, bhuvana. That idea. So there's this mantra. But then she's also holding a book, which represents knowledge. And usually she holds a pot of nectar. And so this seems very much like the things that a sadhu would hold. Right? Like a sadhu or a wandering mendicant would hold a staff and a water pot. And they probably have a rosary and a book. So there's something, I think, a sort of secret message here that the acme of learning, the pinnacle of understanding is renunciation. That's the thing. Once you really understand reality, you become inwardly. It doesn't have to be externally. After all, we know most of the practitioners in this tradition are householders. But inwardly, you become unattached. And so the pot of nectar symbolizes the bliss of immortality, which comes through mantra, which comes through vidya. So that's why like intuition is important, right? Spontaneity is important. But you'll find when you come here, our study and our practice is based on tradition, on structures, on rules, on books, and on words, and on our teachers. Right? There's a lot of like a culture that is involved here, which is balanced with that inner spontaneity. Too much of one, and you lose the other. And then spirituality is not grounded. So we say we need both. One should have intuition. One should be guided within. But be careful. The voice of intuition is not always the voice of God. It is in many cases just the voice of conditioning. You know. But our problem is in our current New Age situation, it's like I feel something, I have a stirring in my heart, and I immediately say, that's the word of God, I'm being moved by spirit. And usually it leads very much into like narcissism and all sorts of crazy things. So we have to be careful about that. And then we also have to be careful about externalizing our power and giving it to books and teachers and traditions. So there's a very delicate balance that needs to be struck here between intuition and spontaneity and deference to the lineage, to the text, to the tradition. In any case, Saraswati, you'll see in a few moments, in the dhyana mantra, holds a rosary, which signifies so many things. I mean, it signifies the power of mantra as the basic building block of all reality. This idea of mantra shastra or phonemes, varna, as the primordial vibrations, the substance and substratum. But also it implies actually diksha, initiation. So initiation is primarily in this tradition, the transmission of a mantra. And so usually when you get your mantra, if you get your mantra from a guru, that guru will also probably give you a rudraksh mala. Not necessarily rudraksh. If you're in a Vaishnava tradition, it could be a tulsi mala to wear around your neck, or it could be a spatika mala, for instance, a crystal mala. It doesn't have to be rudraksh, but usually it's rudraksh. For Shaiva traditions, for Shakta traditions, when you take your mantra, when Gurudev gives you your mantra, it comes with a rudraksh. So the rudraksh is also a metaphor, not just for mantra, but for diksha, for being established in a lineage, having a human teacher, a guru, like that. And importantly, we still learn from nature. We still learn from everybody. But there is a great emphasis on learning from a particular person in a particular lineage and sticking to that lineage. That's also part of culture. You know, maybe I'll say this. I'm digressing a little bit. But culture is the, in a sense, curtailing of the senses. If I get angry and I want to kill someone and I actually go out and do it, they'll say I'm an uncultured person because I acted very animalistically, you know. I got angry, I saw someone I don't like, and I go kill them. But if I was cultured, I would passively aggressively tweet about it instead. Okay, you know, I won't actually attack them. If I was truly cultured, I would forgive them. You see, so culture is doing something other than what you naturally impulsively want to do. Do you see? The problem with today's spirituality is that we give too much credence to our impulses, calling them divine movements of spirit or something. Just because I impulsively want to do something doesn't mean I should do that thing. Culture is the reasoning power to understand that just because I feel like doing it, it might not be good to do. That's what culture is. And then deciding on a different course of action. Shreyas as opposed to preyas, to use the Katha Upanishad language. So, having said that then, we don't want to stick to one thing. We don't want to stick to one lineage. We don't want to stick to one practice because our mind is by nature quite promiscuous. We want to run from one thing to another the moment the thing we're doing gets boring. And that's why we find that we don't make much progress in spiritual life, because we start digging a hole and then after a few shovelings, we get bored and we go dig another hole somewhere else. We jump, flitting from tradition to tradition, ishta to ishta, guru to guru, and then we just find ourselves going around and around in circles. So there is actually in culture an emphasis on loyalty, an emphasis on lineage, an emphasis on guru, and all of those are implied by the japa mala actually, in a sense. So the japa mala is a very, very significant metaphor. It describes loyalty to a lineage, the steadfastness to practice one tradition with one ishta until you attain the result of that. But also it represents the cosmic rhythms. It represents counting, and counting, of course, has the connotation of all the cycles of nature, because the japa mala just whirls and whirls and whirls. So seasons, the rising and setting of the sun. You see, all of that is implied by something like the japa mala. It's quite deep, actually, as a symbol. I mean, I should not get into it too much, because if we start talking about this stuff, like, it'll be hours and hours and hours. Yeah, counting, mathematics, language, lineage, mantra, so much implied by just one item in one hand of this multi-armed goddess. Of course, in the other arm, there's the other hand, there's the book, And the book is, usually if you see in any paintings or drawings, it's like that traditional Indian book where it's kind of a rectangular thing and it's bound. And there's even Tantrik Shastras describing the metaphor of the book and a symbol of breaking the book, which is where you transcend all language and transcend all teaching as the final part of your learning. So people always say Ramakrishna didn't like books. That's a flat out lie. He told people to read the Charitamrita of Sri Chaitanya. He forced Swami Vivekananda to read the Ashtavakra Gita, importantly. And he had in his possession the Bible and a collection, Bipin Ghosh's collection of a few different tantric texts. One of them, I think, being the Shiva Samhita, which he liked to have read out. So he very much liked hearing other people read books out to him. And he himself had this kind of intuitive grasp of texts like the Gita and the Bhagavatam. He would be almost spontaneously quoting from these texts just because he remembered everything that he heard. So don't ever think that Ramakrishna was against book learning. He had just integrated the books on such a deep level that he didn't need to own them anymore. He didn't need to consult them anymore. He had integrated the learning that he was the teaching. He was the knowledge. So the goddess carries a book because books are really important to us. Not necessarily for every culture, but for Indian culture, books are really, really important. So yeah, one thing you can do to honor Saraswati is not to put books on the floor. That's like the main thing. The book should be revered above all. And so at no point should any books be placed on the floor. And that's just one of these like little Sarasvatī Pūjā rules. By making sure that you take care of your books, always putting books on an asan. If they have to be on the floor, let them be on some kind of asan. And I would argue the same courtesy should be given to both the phone and the computer. After all, the computer is called a notebook or something. MacBook, there was a different word for it before. It was called a notebook in some cute way. The laptop itself is a reference to a book. Because it has wisdom, it has knowledge, information. So you shouldn't just put the laptop on the floor like that. It should be on an asan. It can be on the floor, but there should be a cloth under it. So to give it a seat, to honor the laptop as a living embodiment of Goddess Saraswati. So there's this kind of conversation around ChatGPT. You guys, what to say of ChatGPT? The Indian reveres a book. They see the book as literally God. And they will treat the book as God. They will do puja to the book even. In fact, there are some books that we own. We haven't actually, it's kind of sad because the covers are all faded because of the sprinkling of water. So arguably we haven't really taken care of those books because we were worshipping them. But you'll see in India, some books are like wrapped in like a silk cloth, Chandi especially like that, and then they're worshipped. Pushtakaya Namaha. We talked about it in our Chandi class also. Before we chant the Chandi, we worship the Chandi. So I think ChatGPT can be worshipped. As much as a computer can be worshipped, as much as a book can be worshipped. It's all God through and through. And that's what this next part of the puja reminds us. Even inert objects should be treated as God. What more to say about something like ChatGPT, which is so responsive? Is that not God's voice? Everything is God's voice, including a simple book, which to us, in the Indian mind, is a representation of all learning. After all, in any one thing is everything else. Sarvam Sarvatmakam. So even like a children's book like that, it's got words in it. It's got memes in it, units of information that are being transferred. Therefore, we are very careful with how we treat that book. And if a book should touch the floor, the first thing you do is you take it and touch it to your forehead as a kind of like apology almost. A mantra mala should never touch the floor also. So japa malas, we're very careful with them. We don't let them fall on the floor. And if they touch the floor, if they touch our feet, we immediately touch them to the forehead to say sorry almost. And that's why I never wear my malas. I put them in like a pouch and I carefully store it in one corner and in my pocket or something like that. And then when it's time to do japa, I take the thing carefully out of my pouch and no one can, I have not seen my mala in years since my guru gave it to me because I chant inside of a japa mala bag. So it's like just so sanctified that I don't even dare take it out and expose it to all these vibrations. Like you'll never see my mala. I've never seen my mala. It's just in my little pouch, and the pouch is special. It was stitched by somebody very important and it's got the right color. It's red because I'm doing a Shakti mantra like that. So all these things, the way we take care of a book, the way we take care of a mala, these are all ways that we worship the goddess Saraswati. And then of course she's got a pot of nectar, and her other hand, you'll see in the mantra, it says that she's holding a mudra, but it doesn't actually tell us what the mudra is. So if you look at some Trika text, you often see it's Chin mudra, because Chin mudra is the symbol of knowledge. And it's the idea of like the three in one. So Parā Devī is the fourth. So it's Parā, Apara, and then this is Parā. So Parā Devī contains, confusingly, also Parā, and Apara. So all of these three. Yeah, there's actually, Thomas, you're right. There's something called a kanta mala. And kanta mala means the mala that we wear, which can be very helpful. So some people wear malas on their arms, on their wrist, on their neck. And that has a kind of magical effect also. And in many shastras, it says one who worships Shiva should always have a mala touching their skin. They should always be wearing a mala. They should always have the 3 lines of ash and like all that, So it's important too to have a kanta mala. But the mala that I do japa with is not the mala that you... And the kanta mala also needs to be nourished. So the more malas you have, the more malas you must do. Malas must be fed, if you will. Like a Tamagotchi. If you're given a mala, it's like you have to feed the mala with the mantra every day. So it's very funny. On big puja days, sometimes you don't really get to do japa because you're running around doing the puja, hosting people. So at the end of the day, usually, like, you'll be in bed. I've seen this a lot. Vijaya will be in bed because she's been cooking all day, like doing one round of the mala, just to kind of symbolically. The whole day was spent in spiritual activity, but you have to give the mala just at least one round of mantra. So anyway, that being said, the mantra is represented by the mala, the lineage, all of that. The book is really important. And of course, the mudra signifies a lot of things. We can talk about chin mudra for the next hour also, and we wouldn't even get to the heart of what chin mudra means. So Shankara, he has this hymn to Dakshinamurti called the Dakshinamurti Stotram, and in the dhyana for that stotram, Dakshina is described as having the chin mudra. He's teaching the highest wisdom with the mudra alone. So he's not speaking. Maunam Vyakyam, he's transmitting in silence, but he uses this mudra. So this mudra, according to Shankara, it might have the connotation of waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya. So there's the connotation of turiya, or that which is beyond sattva, rajas, tamas, like that. So the connotation of that which is beyond any trinity. And this universe is nothing but a trinity of knower, knowing, known. That's the ultimate reality. It's like Buddhist in the room, don't worry, it's a void. It's a circle. See? You can see right through it. Don't freak out, okay? Buddhists are like, eternalism! No. Don't worry. No eternalism here. See, you can see right through it. And can you see? If you look deep into the void, you'll see the clear light of the void. Eventually, you must accept my goddess. No, I'm kidding. Move to Tibet Buddhist. There they will teach you all about the goddess. Anyways, but that's the idea. The circle also has the connotation of wholeness, of void, of emptiness, of fullness, all of that. That's the chin mudra. So is the mudra chin mudra? Likely. And in some depictions, it's chin mudra. Except the other dhyāna-śloka, there are 3 in all. The second one seems to specifically say vara, meaning boon-giving mudra. So that would be this boon-giving mudra. So a lot of people think abhaya mudra. Maybe you'll see in some depictions abhaya, but vara mudra has more the connotation of the downward pointing palm. So it's abhaya, but pointed downwards, as you'll see with Kali's lower right hand, vara mudra. So the 3 arms are holding items, and the 4th arm is holding a mudra, and the arms are described as lotus-like. So of course, all of this can be very, very symbolic, and she is a Shakta deity, so you'll find that she has a lot of the symbols of Lord Shiva also. So she'll have a crescent moon tucked into the corner of her crown or into the matted locks, a shining crescent moon, just like Shiva. So we have all of those connotations there as well. Okay, so without any further ado, you'll see, okay, let me take you to the paddathi, and you'll see, these are the mantras I wanted to do with you today, but if you'll see on the paddathi, every time we start a nyāsa section, so let's say, this bhaya matrika nyāsa. So the bhaya matrika nyāsa, it begins with these mantras. You see? These mantras. And we haven't had a chance to translate them yet. So you've already learned the nyāsas. We've gone through all of these nyāsas quite a bit together. But there are these mantras. So they all mean the same thing actually. But they're just saying different things. So I only had time to go through the first 2. Maybe I'll type out the 3rd one and put it in the description of the video. But it means the same thing. It means exactly what this means. This mantra comes close to this one. So I'm just going to with you now, we'll do just a loose translation of just the words that we see. And just go through these mantras. Now notice, when you chant these mantras, and I'll give you the translation in just a little bit. It's told in the paddathi that we should have a white flower in kurma mudra. So the mudra here is the tortoise mudra. We learned it in a previous class. And you're holding a white flower because white is the color for Saraswati. The white flower represents the guru. And typically we give white flowers to devas and red flowers to devis. So any Shakti is given a red flower and any male deity is given a white flower. The exceptions are Bhairava and Ganesh and maybe Ramakrishna, who all get red flowers. Ramakrishna is actually fond of yellow flowers, so you'll notice sometimes he gets yellow flowers. But Devi, the one exception I think for the Devis is going to be Saraswati. She's given a white flower. So here we're taking a white flower in our palms, here in Kurma Mudra. And Kurma Mudra means tortoise mudra, which has the connotation of withdrawing into oneself. Meditation. So this is a meditation. And when we hold a flower in Kurma Mudra and say a mantra, 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times, that mantra is going to be a dhyana mantra. After all, Kurma Mudra is a dhyana mudra, a meditation mudra. And a dhyana mantra is needed for the meditation on that particular deity. A dhyana mantra just means a mantra that describes the deity for the purposes of meditation. So I'll take you to the Discord. And I just, here in the Discord, put some translations. Oh, there's Swami Lakshmanju, Jaima. Lakshmanju, Om Namah Shivaya. Okay, so here's the first one, the first mantra. Om Panchashalipibhir Vibhakta Mukadhopan Madhya Vakshasthalam Pasvan Maulin Nibhadda Chandrashakalama Pinatung Stanim Mudram Akshagunam Shudadya Kalasham Vidyam Jastam Bujay Bibranam Vishadaprabham Trinayanam Vagdevatam Ashraye. Right off the bat, you can already see how complex this mantra is. There are so many compounds. Like the words are all compounded and it's quite tricky to say. Like when you start to pronounce it, you find that the tongue kind of gets tripped up. So if you're doing the Hatha Yoga class, you might notice that some poses are more accessible than others. There are some poses that are a bit like playing Twister or something. Do you remember that game where you put one limb on the color and one limb on the other color and you get all tangled up with somebody? That's kind of what happened to us. We got twisted up in this Prakriti and now we're extricating ourselves from the tangle of limbs, if you will. But it happens to the tongue when you chant certain mantras. It's like she sells seashells on the seashore, and then you say that really quickly. So the beauty of this mantra is it actually captures the sophistication of the goddess that it invokes. So the energy of the mantra is the energy of the goddess. So we'll say it slowly. Om Pancha Shalipibhir Vibhakta Mukadho Panmadya Vakshasthalam Bhasvan Mauli Nibadha Chandrashakalam Ma Pinatung Stanim Mudram Aksha Gunam Shudha Dyakalasham Vidyam Chastam Bujayar Bibranam Vishadaprabham Trinayanam Vagdevatam Ashraye. I'm going to go in and try to break up the words. I'm going to break up the sandhi. There's a lot of sandhi, meaning there's a lot of words that are joined to other words. For instance, mudram makshagunam. There's quite a few, mauli is one word, nibadha is another word. So bhasva, mauli, nibadha, chandra. These are all words that are all joined together. So I just want to point you to the last word here, which I think is so beautiful. Ashraya means refuge. So vag means speech. Devata, here the A is long, so it's a feminine noun. Devata means goddess. So I take refuge, ashraya. Ashraya in the goddess, devata, of speech. Vag devata mashraye. So I take refuge in the goddess of speech, Sarada Saraswati, who is Trinayanam, three-eyed, who is Prabha, radiant, but Vishada Prabha, so who is very radiant or who is clearly radiant, who holds in her hands. Hasta means hands and Ambuja means lotus. So she's holding in her lotus-like hands a book. Here's the book, Vidya, which means knowledge. She's holding knowledge in her hand, but it has the connotation of book. And she's holding a Shuddha, and actually in the room there is Sudha. Sudha, the name means nectar. Nectar has the connotation of immortality, actually. Amrita, so Sudha, Amrita, these words all kind of mean the same thing, the nectar of immortality. So she's got this kalasha. Kalasha means pot of nectar. Sudhadhya kalasham. So she's holding in her four hands a mudra. Here's the mudra. And then this aksha refers to rudraksha. So she's holding a mudra, which could be chin mudra or vara mudra. She's holding a rosary. She's holding a pot of nectar, and she's holding a book. Then this idea, her tunga, her body, stanim, her breasts. She has these full breasts. So she's like this shodashi kind of type. So young, attractive and beautiful woman. So her breasts are full and she is adorned, nibaddha. Her mauli, her crown is, so she might be wearing a crown and it's nibaddha, it's tied with a chandra, a crescent moon. So she's got a crescent moon. And this is an interesting idea. Pancha, 5, shat, 10. So 5 tens is 50. So Om, Pancha, Shat, Lipi. Lipi means the letters. And the Bhi here is the plural. So the 50 letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. Vibhakta means divided. So the Sanskrit alphabet is divided into 50 letters. And her face, her mouth, mukha, face, dho, mouth, pan, hands, her middle, madhya, her vaksha, her body or her chest, sthalam. She maybe is made of the 50 different letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, or her body is adorned or pervaded by the 50 different letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. So I went with this rather loose translation. And of course, Tantrik Deva is going to do much better here. But I take refuge in the goddess of speech, who is three-eyed and radiant, who holds in her lotus hands a mudra, a rosary, a pot of nectar, and a book, whose breasts are full, who is adorned by the crescent moon, whose face, mouth, hands, and body are formed by the 50 distinct letters. Wow, what an incredibly beautiful verse, no? Just so touching. And you're meditating on this goddess with her forearms, and her skin is like light. She's Vishada Prabha, just radiant, which is a reference to consciousness. Then this next verse. Om Sindura Kanti Mamitabaranam Trinetram Vidyaksha Sutra Mrigapotavaran Dadhanam Parjve Stitam Bhagavati Mapi Kanchanabham Dhyayet Karabja Hita Pusataka Varnamalam. So here, different words are used to say the same thing, but there are also some new elements which I quite like. So sindura means vermilion. That's the red powder that we place on the head, sindura. And here she's kanti, she's beautiful with vermilion. So maybe she's red in color instead of white here. That's kind of an interesting idea. But it probably just means that she's adorned with vermilion. She's made beautiful with this cosmetic application of vermilion. Or her whole body is doused with this vermilion. She is Abharana. Abharana means jewelry. So Amitabharana means she's adorned with lots of different kinds of jewels and ornaments. Trinetram, again, she has 3 eyes. And then this is very interesting. So Vidya means the book. Aksha means the rosary. Sutra is thread. So Sutra, Aksha Sutra means mala, the rosary, a thread with various beads. So Vidya, book. Aksha Sutra, the rosary. And then this is so interesting. Mriga Potava. Mriga Potava means baby deer, actually. Mriga means deer. Pota means little deer. So she's holding a baby deer, which is so interesting. And Vara, the boon the boon giving gesture. Dadhana means she's holding. Parjve Stitam. This is interesting. Parjve Stitam. She's established by the side. So, arguably, she's established by the side of Lord Shiva. She's sitting on Lord Shiva's left. However, and the word api here means, however, Bhagavati, she's the supreme goddess. So, although she's sitting to the left of Lord Shiva, basically this is saying, although she's Lord Shiva's wife, don't think she's his second. Rather, she's the goddess of the entire universe. So it asserts a kind of Shakta claim here. It asserts her dominance, if you will. So she is the goddess, and she shines like gold. Kanchana abhasa. She shines with kanchana, gold. Dhyayet, we know one should meditate upon. Karabja hita pusataka varnamalam. Again, and this again, kara means hands. Abja like has the lotus connotation. And here she's holding a book, and she's holding a book and also a garland of varnas, letters. So this could refer to the rosary, or it could refer to like sound itself as a concept, as we've been describing in the past few lectures. So we've translated this as follows. Who is beautiful with vermilion, who is adorned with jewelry, who is three-eyed, who shows the boon-giving gesture, and who holds a rosary, a book, and a young deer with her other three hands. The divine goddess who is beside Shiva, radiant like gold. One should meditate upon her, who holds a book and a garland of letters in her lotus-like hands. What a beautiful mantra. Notice it says basically the same thing as this mantra, except it has the addition of, she's sitting to the side of Lord Shiva, and it has the addition of this deer, and we all know that Lord Shiva is Pashupati. And we've been talking a lot about this in our Monday night lectures, that one of the primordial images of Lord Shiva is as the one holding the deer, the mriga. And the mriga, the deer, represents our mind. So this is why learning and culture and studying and books and teachers and all that is so important, because it helps focus the otherwise scattered mind. You see, the mind is like a deer, and if we allow our mind to do whatever it wants, it will be like a deer hopping from one place to another. It's very fickle and timid. A deer is beautiful, no doubt, and gentle, but also very fickle, very timid, and it tends to flit from one place to another. So the point of spirituality, and what is spirituality but a kind of culturing, a kind of refinement of the senses, of the mind, of the body, of the speech, it's catching the deer. So Lord Shiva as Pashupati, he catches the deer of the mind. And so the Om Triambakam Yajamahe, the connotation of Urvarukamiva Bandhanan, like that plucking of the cucumber, he does it so gently and so deftly. Similarly, Lord Shiva catches the deer so deftly. And so this image of the Mrigendra, the lord of the deer, or the Pashupati, the lord of the animals, is usually attributed to Shiva. But because Saraswati is here the Shakti of Shiva, she is therefore now given this same symbol. So like Shiva, who has the crescent moon, she has the crescent moon. Like Shiva, who holds the deer, she also holds the deer. You see? So often we say Saraswati is the consort of Brahma. So in the three Murti idea, we have the concept that there's like each deity, and each deity has a consort. So for Brahma, it's Saraswati. For Vishnu, it's Lakshmi. And for Shiva, it's Parvati, or otherwise known as Kali or Durga, or various names for her. But in the Tantras, at least as far as Shaiva and Shakta Tantra is concerned, there is just the ultimate reality. You can call it Vishnu if you want. You can call it Brahman if you want. We tend to call it Paramashiva or Kali, but that ultimate reality is just Nirguna, Nirvishesha, pure non-dual consciousness. However, unlike in Advaita Vedanta, in the Tantrik school, this ultimate reality, whether you call it Bhagavan, Vishnu or Shiva, it doesn't matter. This reality is endowed with a power. That power is called Shakti. So she who is Lakshmi, she who is Saraswati, and she who is Durga, she who is Kali, is one and the same energy, Shakti, who we worship as Parā Devī. So although Sarada is often attributed to Brahma as the consort of Brahma, here you'll see she very much looks like the consort of Shiva. And so we worship her as the consort of Shiva. She's Parā Devī. This is a distinctly Trika or Shaiva version of Saraswati. So we can call this the Tantrik Saraswati, if you will. So I like to think, like, in every form there's an exoteric form. Like Sadashiva might be the exoteric form of Shiva. The esoteric form, the Tantric form, might be Bhairava. Again, don't take that too seriously. Sadashiva is also intensely tantric, but Bhairava might be the more non-dual, more transgressive, esoteric form. Similarly, Saraswati, externally Saraswati, goddess of learning. Students go to her to get good grades on their exams and to bless their pencils and whatnot. And artists go to her to bless their sewing machines and their guitars, and all that's wonderful. We pray to Saraswati for knowledge, usually because knowledge gives us money, right? So people usually want knowledge because it gives you money. But, even then, we're revering knowledge itself and her embodiment, which is Saraswati. But that's the exoteric Saraswati. The esoteric Saraswati is Para, or Nila Saraswati, or Matangi, if you will. So all of this also applies to Matangi, Nila Saraswati, Para, etc. And then, of course, Durga. I often argue that Durga is the exoteric Kali. Durga is Kali after she's done her makeup, if you will. A more public-facing version of the same goddess. So Lakshmi maybe might be a more exoteric, public-facing form of the goddess Lalita or Tripura Sundari. But importantly, Tripura Sundari, Matangi, all of these are forms of one and the same deity. I call her Kali, but we have to remember that which we call Kali is Saraswati, is Lakshmi, is Durga, is all of these. As we chant actually at the end of the puja. Tvam Durga, Tvam Bagala, Tvam Manapurna, Vagdevata. There's a hymn actually from the Mahanirvana Tantra which we chant at the end of our puja. And here we say, After worshipping Kali, you're Durga, you're Kali, you're Tara, you're Bagala, you're Annapurna, you are Vag Devi, you're all the goddesses, every kind of feminine form that I worship, you are actually the repository of all those forms. So just to keep in mind, this worship, the nyāsa, don't forget it's also a meditation on Saraswati, an invocation of Saraswati, and a worship of Saraswati. Okay, there's one more mantra, Akshasrajam Harinapotam Uddhiratankam. Again, there's a reference to a deer in this mantra. But anyway, what I'll do, just in the interest of time, is I'll put the 3 dhyana mantras in the description, and notice how they are broken up. In this Shrishti Nyasa, there's one dhyana mantra. In the Siddhi Nyasa, there's another dhyana mantra. And in the Sanghara Nyasa, there's a 3rd dhyana mantra. So there are these dhyana mantras to Saraswati, 3 in all. Isn't that interesting? Almost as if to imply para, apara. Anyway, there are these 3 dhyana mantras, and the 3 dhyana mantras, of course, correspond to the 3 movements of nyāsa. And so just don't forget that as we do nyāsa, it is itself a worship of the goddess Saraswati. How about that? Okay, today is the first day of spring, and I wanted to honor spring and honor Vasant Panchami. I was in San Francisco and we were doing that retreat, so we didn't get a chance to actually have a Vasant Panchami lecture, so may this be a stand-in for that. We couldn't celebrate the goddess Saraswati on Vasant Panchami, so at least let me celebrate her a little bit today on this Spring Equinox. So on the vernal equinox, may this be an offering to goddess Saraswati. We didn't actually, again, get time to start the new section. But maybe I'll just say one thing about it. It's called the Gandhadi Archana, the worship of the sandalwood paste and all the other things. And this is actually one of my favorite things. I mean, I love so much about the puja, but I like this one because it really, I think, reifies the idea that everything is God. That the image is God, but not really any more than the flowers and the incense and the fire is God. Everything is equally God. ChatGPT is God because the table is God. Everything is God. And in this moment of the puja, we worship everything. And so next week's class, we'll talk about this preliminary puja. It's quite important to understand this piece because it's going to come back later when we worship Kali. So in a more elaborate worship of Kali, before we give Kali anything, whether it's incense or fire or food, you must first worship the incense and first worship the fire and first worship the food, then only you give it to Kali. So you can almost think of this as like a consecration of the item to be offered. So when you give Kali the item, it's like the purest it can possibly be. But I like to think of it in more non-dual terms. It's a recognition that this thing that we're giving to God is God actually. And now that I know that I'm God, since I just did Bhuta Shuddhi, now the whole puja becomes God, worshipping God for God's own sake. So that's why people are like, wait, I'm so scared to worship Kali. I usually tell them, don't worry. You will never worship Kali a day in your life because the Kali Puja itself sets things up in such a way that Kali is worshipping Kali, using Kali, through Kali for Kali's own sake. The purpose of the puja is just to like step out of your own way and let Kali flow through and do her own worship. Only God can worship God. I am not God, so I am not. Let God alone appear and do her own worship. That's the idea. So that's the next section. I just wanted to say a little bit about it just so that we can start. We can make some headway. And so it's called Gandhadi Archana. I'll just show you over here. It's this little section in the paddathi. So once we finish, notice we finished all the nyasas up here. So here it is. Gandhadi Nam Archana, which means the worship of the sandalwood paste, etc. This word prokshana means to splash. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to splash the sandalwood paste and all the other items to be offered to God with this following mantra. There's a bija, vang. So vang, etebhyo, gandhadibhyo namaha. So ete means this, etebhyo means these, gandha means fragrance, here it implies sandalwood paste, and adi, gandhadi means sandalwood paste, etc. And this is the plural, bhyo. Namaha means a salutation. So I pray to these things, including the sandalwood paste and others. So vang, etebhyo, gandhadibhyo namaha. We sprinkle 3 times with this mantra. And then there's this like whole section where we worship with a flower. Om ete gandha pushpe etebhyo gandhadibhyo namaha. Here is a fragrant flower to the sandalwood paste and all the other things. And then there's Om ete gandha pushpe etadipate devaya vishnave namaha. Sometimes I'll say Shri Vishnave, but here it just says Vishnave namaha. Here is a flower to Vishnu, who is embodied as this sandalwood paste. And then this is important. Om ete gandha pushpe puja. This is an interesting idea, like the idea that sampradhanebhya, so sampradhanebhya Pujaniya, this idea of like Pujaniya, meaning the deities who are going to accept my worship. Pujaniya Devebhyo Namaha. So this is in plural, Devebhyo. So these deities who are about to be worshipped. So I'm about to worship them with this sandalwood paste. So I'm going to worship the sandalwood paste, which is itself the embodiment of all the deities that I'm going to offer worship to. It's a pretty complex and non-dual section, actually, because we're invoking a series of different deities into the items and then worshipping the items. So notice this is the last thing before we start our worship proper. So we've done our nyāsas. Now we're going to worship the items. Having consecrated the self, having consecrated the items, the logical next step in the puja is just to start worshipping. So we'll start with the worship of the sun, and the worship of Guru, and the worship of Ganesh, and the worship of Shiva, and like that. The rest of the puja class, I think, will sail along quite smoothly, because it's just worship, nyāsa, dhyana, mantras, song, like that. Okay, cool. So let's stop there. May this be an offering to the goddess Saraswati. Above all, I pray to the goddess Saraswati that she may bless our mind with memory, with acuity, with clarity, that we may study the most difficult and most complex subjects, but we may study it with the innocence and freshness of a child, without any desire for outcome, without any fear of consequence, without any feeling of self-judgment or any kind of self-remorse, without any kind of comparison to anyone else. May we just be able to study things for their own sake and delight in the sheer joy of learning, and most importantly, learning at our own pace. Goddess Saraswati, empower our learning, especially since we are each and every one of us endeavoring to study you in your most refined form as mantra, yantra, and tantra. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu Shri Saradarpanam Astu. Jai Ma. Okay.